Hi, I'm Selene Rodriguez, and this is our Defeating Islamist Radicalization podcast, where today we're going to be talking about foreign terrorist organizations and how we can expand Texas's ability to find out who they are and get them out of our state. I am joined today by my colleagues Joshua Treviño and Ammon Blair, and there is so much we're going to dig into, but we're also going to try to keep this to the point because I know we get really into acronyms and definitions, and we want to make sure that this is easy for everyone to get into. So let's just start off. We are not new to FTO research. We have been talking about this since, 2022 now? Josh, I think you piloted that for us. So what is the issue right now in Texas? Who is designated? How did that start? Where did TPPF get involved in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much. And thank you both for leading the way on this incredibly important topic. The Texas Public Policy Foundation got involved in the designation of foreign terror organizations, as you say, back in 2022, 2023. We had a very good scholar, a gentleman named Antonio Sosa, who wrote a paper for us that came out on the designation of actually Mexican cartels was the first target on foreign terror organizations. And so the reason that it's important to know, it's obvious why it's important to know what the groups are, but the reason it's important to understand how the designation process works is because of what the designation allows. Now, at the federal level, there's two major things that it allows, and there's a lot of ancillary things too. But the two major things are what we call material support. So, for example, if you in any way support the operation of a foreign terror organization, you are liable for prosecution if a prosecutor chooses to pursue that. Let's say you give them banking services, you sell them a car, you run a garage and you fix a vehicle for them, anything like that. And the mens rea component of it is there, but it's not bulletproof. And so what that does is that gives prosecutors a lot of leeway to knock out the pillars of support that these foreign terror organizations rely upon. The second thing that it enables is a little less empirical, but it's no less real, and it's the political landscape that attaches to foreign terror designations. There is a qualitative difference between how government in general, and this is whether it's Republican or Democratic or federal or state, pursues a criminal enterprise versus a foreign terrorist organization. And I would argue, and the foundation has argued, that what the foreign terror designation does is really politically facilitate the bringing to bear of the full apparatus and might of the state against these organizations. So whereas if you have a criminal organization, kind of the perceptual default is that they're going to be pursued by law enforcement. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but it's going to be a particular set of tools. But with the foreign terror designation, what you get is law enforcement plus diplomatic capabilities, law enforcement plus military capabilities. And what we've seen, particularly since President Trump's return on January 20th, 2025, is that there is a willingness to bring those powers and capabilities to bear in very positive ways. Now, one thing that foreign terror organizations require, and I know you're going to get into this through the show, is that the organizations so designated have to fulfill a particular set of criteria. They have to act in a terroristic manner, obviously, and you kind of know that when you see it. But they also have to have a political agenda attached to them, and that's something that's been qualitatively new. Previously, and when I say previously, I mean in years, decades, generations past, things like cartels or kind of the Islamist organizations that you're talking about with DIR didn't necessarily meet the political agenda criteria for a variety of reasons. But what we've seen with the intersection of state actors, domestic and really foreign in this particular case, and also a much more overt political agenda, what you see is that a lot of these entities come into the ambit of what a terror designation is for. So the foundation's been leading the way on it. I think it's fair to say, I'll close with this, I promise. I think it's fair to say that without the foundation's prior work in 22, 23, 24, that we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in, where the federal government has dramatically expanded its willingness and ability to designate groups as terror organizations, nor would we be able to talk about it here at the state level as well. And I know that's what you all are leading the way on now.
So let's talk about at the state level.
Sure.
We have Tren de Aragua from Venezuela.
Sure.
We have certain Mexican cartels designated here in Texas. And now the newest designations from Governor Abbott are CAIR and Muslim Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. So Ammon, does the state have the authority to designate an organization as an FTO in Texas?
Yes, but not a federal FTO. I think that distinction needs to be made pretty clear. So,
what is that distinction?
So one is it's the federal government through the State Department declares an organization as one foreign entity, of course, and a terrorist organization. Now the state also has that mechanism as well. And so that was actually done in, it was SB 1900, I think, by Senator Birdwell. And that was effective September 1st of 2023. So just like what Josh stated, it actually started from the Mexican cartels. The governor declared them as foreign terrorist organizations from a state perspective. They are foreign, and they're also terrorist organizations in 2022. That preceded that session in the 88th session, where they established that they are foreign terrorist organizations, and they gave a codified definition of what that was. And I kind of want to read it because I don't want to mess up in terms of I have a lot of things in my mind, and so typically it's hard to get out of my mind. So I want to read this so I'm not wrong. And how it defines a foreign terrorist organization as 3 or more persons operating as an organization at least partially outside the United States, that's key, who engage in criminal activity and threatens the security of the state or its residents. So because of that, it is far broader than the federal designation. It doesn't have to include political at all. It only has to have partially in other countries. So Mexican cartels are perfect. We know that they're headquartered in Mexico. But we know that they use intermediaries, subcontractors and contractors inside the United States, especially in Texas, that are typically U.S. citizens that are not from Mexico. So this gives a certain ability after that fact to then go after the organizations that are deemed as foreign terrorist organizations under the state.
But hold on, let's see. So that makes perfect sense. Where we're at now is we're in a lawsuit. The state of Texas is in a lawsuit with CAIR because of the governor's designation. And a big argument is, well, we're not foreign. And I don't really know that they're arguing we're not terrorists, but I know they're arguing we're not foreign. How does that apply here?
Yeah, great. So then you have to, as the governor's office or the attorney general's office, they must make that nexus. The burden of proof is now on the state to show that CAIR, Muslim Brotherhood, or any of these organizations have links to other countries, whether that's going to be also like Hamas or Iran, whether that's going to be Mexico or like Nicaragua, Venezuela. So in that definition, all it says is 3 more persons operating at least partially outside. So that means within that organization, do any of their leadership, do they have any ties? Are they foreign as well? We know that under the Biden's weaponized mass migration, we know that many of them came here, whether that was illegally or whether that was also through the legal mechanisms that they provided, whether the TPS or
temporary protected status,
temporary protected status, or as refugees, or as through the I can't think of the name, parole, which was supposed to be on a case-by-case basis, but we did it through mass. And so that's the issue. So under a state, like I said, it's very, very broad. And we know, and I'm grateful that it is very broad, and then we don't have to have the same mechanisms because it allows us to now go after CAIR, even though the federal government has not designated them as terrorist organizations yet. In fact, the federal government has only designated a few of the Muslim Brotherhood factions as terrorist organizations. And so that's why actually at the state level, it's for my opinion and for us here at the state, it's actually better.
So Texas and Florida have labeled those 2 organizations. The federal government has not. I think there's 2 key components with FTO designation. So Josh, I'm starting with you. You talked about money, right? Material support.
Right.
What does the designation, and specifically at the state level, if we have that, how do we go after the money? Because we know that's how you cripple these organizations the most.
Yeah.
Follow the money.
Yeah, no, it's one of the major ways. Well, look, illicit financial transactions leave a trail, and so step one is always finding out what those are, curtailing them. Law enforcement has tremendous authority to do exactly that, and so.
Does the illicit factor mostly go towards NGOs? Is that a big issue that we're seeing in this puzzle?
There are significant issues of NGO funding vis-a-vis cartels and human trafficking. With Islamist organizations, it does exist. And so you think back to some of the historical cases like the Holy Land Foundation, for example, and you do have issues with NGOs being used to channel, direct, and obviously fund a lot of these operations. My suspicion is that it's an admixture of all of the above. You are going to have NGOs that are being used essentially as pass-throughs for funds. You're also going to be having just more nakedly criminal activities. One of the things that Ammon's done really good work on is talking about the extent to which, like Hezbollah, for example, which is by the way already a designated federal terror group, is funded by cigarette smuggling. Both inside and outside the United States. And so what you have to conceive of it to your question, is there's a web of financing. It's not sole source. And so this is kind of why, to Ammon's point, it's got to be a broad authority, because you're having to chase down a broad array of sources and channels.
And it's designed that way because they want to make it harder for us to figure it out.
Yeah, look, networks that are survivable don't have a single point of failure. And so these entities, and look, the Muslim Brotherhood has existed for generations at this point. And it survives for several reasons. One, because it has an ideological appeal among a certain cohort, but another is that they're operationally very savvy and sophisticated. And so there's no one thing that's the keystone that you take it out and it collapses. You have to go through against the whole edifice, and that's by design on their part.
And Ammon, the second part of this is law enforcement. So you worked as a federal agent, you've been in the U.S. military, you work with Operation Lone Star Task Force here in Texas. With this designation at the state level, what law enforcement tools do we get to go after these FTOs?
Yeah, and that's kind of a hard question. I mean, there's things in statute that allow us to add to whenever we do find someone that has material support to the foreign terrorist organization, when we're working with like the Homeland Security Task Force, or if we're working with DEA or other federal agencies. But technically at the law enforcement level, there really isn't a tool that has been given to our law enforcement. And that's kind of a gap that we're trying to bridge here at Texas Public Policy Foundation. When we work with Sheriff Boyd all the time, when he's out there and he's working against organizations that are in his county or throughout Texas, whether that's Tren de Aragua, whether that's the cartels, whether that's actually illicit tobacco. Does he have the tools necessary to go after them, even though they've been designated as foreign terrorist organizations? Does he have the technology through that intelligence gap? Can he sit there and link himself at the sheriff's department, the financial mechanisms between that individual or organization to those that are foreign terrorist organizations like Hamas, or those that are actually designated? No. And so really there's a gap for those who are actually conducting the casework and the investigations to actually make good cases in order to forward a lot of these advances. So there's been a lot of talk and ask about if the cartels have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations since 2025, where are all the material support charges? Now there are some. However, for how much or how many organizations or how broad that those networks are, and in how many criminal enterprises there are throughout the United States, where are those charges? Well, who's in charge of making those charges? Typically, it's going to be your local law enforcement. They just don't have the tools to do so. And so right now we're working with Department of Homeland Security. We're working with other organizations, even the Department of Transportation, to try to figure out what policies are currently getting in the way now that they're designated, to make sure that the local law enforcement can actually conduct these cases. So at the state level, we do have that statute, like I said, that was codified in law. Senator Birdwell's bill, and all it says, I'm just going to read here real quick, that written findings and notice to the organization relevant officials under that definition, concurrence or approval by more than one constitutional officer or body, publication in a formal register, mandatory periodic review. So does any of that there actually give the tools necessary to a law enforcement agent?
To the guys that have to find the terrorists? Yeah.
No, nothing at all. And so that's the issue. Now, there were other things that were done. There was an FTO package done in the 89th, but still, that still doesn't give the tools necessary. It just adds charges once we find it, and that's it.
So we need to strengthen law enforcement tools, add to their toolbox, and then use the FTO designations to kick in the prosecution side.
It's exactly right. Yeah, I could not agree more with what Ammon has said. It's one thing to make the policy, but the policy has to be pursued. and it is that pursuit that citizens ought to aggressively demand.
And that demand, so let's bring this all home. We're going into the 90th session. What is the one key thing, the one key reform you want to see for our FDO organizational package here that you want to see the legislature do?
Yeah, so now that we've codified that definition, now we need to give the governor as well as the state of Texas teeth to go after that. What if, as Josh talked about, the material support? Okay, we designated an organization. Say we designated CAIR, Muslim Brotherhood, Treviño cartels. Okay, great. What if, just like the federal government, we too at the state level could codify that in law, material support to that organization? Now comes all the tools that we talked about to the local law enforcement, just like the tools that Josh talked about federally. But that's not codified in law at the state level. So if that is there in the state, we have the definition, and then also the material support, that nexus to now bring powers and authorities to our local law enforcement and state agencies to then go after all the entities. Instead of what's happening now, we have rule by executive order. Mm-hmm. We have investigation by the Attorney General. And then what? But for the 90th, that's really what we're looking for. We're now looking for something with teeth.
Now this is the time to get something with teeth. President Trump has said Islamist threats, Mexican cartels are two of the top 3 priorities in our counterterrorism strategy. Governor Abbott is showing he's ready to do everything it takes to protect the state. So we've got amazing leadership, and I'm glad to know TPPF is on the job, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what we get done in the 90th. But gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. That is all we have. Please join us next time for our Defeating Islamist Radicalization show.